My name is Dorothy Jean Chambers, and I'm 65 years old. For 42 years. I worked in finance starting as a secretary in 1979 when women who wanted to be taken seriously wore bow ties and shoulder pads that could have housed small birds, and ending as a senior vice president with an office on the 17th floor and a view that made visitors stop mid-sentence to stare. I was good at my job. Better than good. I made my company millions, advised billionaires on how to keep their money working, and built a reputation as someone who could see 3 moves ahead in any financial chess game. I also built something else. A list of people who pretended to care about me because of what I represented rather than who I was. By the time my retirement party rolled around, I'd been thinking about that list for months. Who would still be here if the money disappeared? Who valued Dorothy, and who valued Dorothy's connections? Dorothy's influence, Dorothy's ability to open doors with a single phone call. So I ran an experiment, a test, if you will. At my own retirement party, I pretended to be broke. Not subtly, blatantly, obviously. In a way that made people uncomfortable and revealed exactly who they were when the shine wore off. And of all the people who showed up that night 73, by my count, including a few I didn't even recognize, only 3 stayed to help clean up when the party ended and the lie was revealed. Let me tell you how I got here. Because this story isn't really about a party. It's about what happens when you spend a lifetime building something and then decide to find out if any of it was real. I grew up in Georgia, in a town small enough that everybody knew your business and big enough that some folks thought their business mattered more than yours. My parents were school teachers. My father taught history. My mother taught English. And both of them taught me that intelligence was the only inheritance that couldn't be stolen or taxed. We weren't poor, but we weren't comfortable either. We were what my mother called respectable, which meant we had enough to eat and wore clean clothes, but took vacations by driving to visit relatives rather than flying to places with beaches. I went to college on scholarships and stubbornness. I studied economics because my high school guidance counselor told me girls don't usually go into that field. And I was the kind of 17-year-old who heard don't as a dare. I graduated in 1979, which was not a banner year for young Black women trying to break into finance. But I had good grades, a better poker face, and the ability to make men feel smart while I quietly corrected their math. I got hired at Whitmore and Associates, a mid-sized investment firm in Manhattan. My official title was secretary, but within 6 months, I was doing analysis work that the junior associates took credit for. My boss, a man named Richard Whitmore III, who wore cufflinks that cost more than my rent, would hand me raw data and say, "Dorothy, make sense of this." And I would. Then he'd present my findings in meetings as if they'd arrived to him in a dream. I didn't complain. Not because I didn't want to, but because I was strategic. I watched, I learned, I documented everything. And when the opportunity came, when Richard made a catastrophically bad recommendation to a major client based on his gut feeling, and I had the data to prove why he was wrong, quietly walked into the CEO's office and explained exactly why the company was about to lose millions if they followed Richard's advice. The CEO, a sharp woman named Maureen, who'd clawed her way up in the 1960s when the obstacles were even higher, looked at me for a long moment. Then she picked up her phone and called the client. "Ignore Richard's recommendation," she said. "Follow Dorothy's analysis instead." The client did. The company saved $8 million. Richard was encouraged to pursue other opportunities. I was promoted to junior analyst. That was 40 years ago. In the decades that followed, I climbed. Sometimes on merit, sometimes on luck, always on the understanding that I had to be twice as good to get half as far. And I was fine with that ratio because it meant I actually was twice as good. I got married in 1985 to a man named Leonard who worked in publishing and read poetry in bed, which I found both pretentious and charming. We had no children, my choice. His acceptance and built a quiet life full of books, travel, and Sunday morning farmers markets where Leonard would buy vegetables we both knew he'd never cook. Leonard died in 2012. Heart attack. Sudden, the kind that leaves you staring at his coffee mug on the counter, wondering when you're supposed to wash it. We'd been married 27 years, and I missed him in ways I still don't have language for. The company gave me 2 weeks bereavement leave. I took one. Work was easier than grief. After Leonard, I worked harder. Longer hours, bigger accounts, more travel. My colleagues thought I was driven by ambition. Really, I was driven by the fact that an empty apartment is quieter than an empty office, and I preferred noise to silence. I became indispensable. The person you called when the market crashed and you needed steady hands. The person who could explain complex derivatives to billionaires who'd made their money in widgets and wanted to diversify without understanding what they were diversifying into. I also became, without quite realizing it, a kind of currency. People wanted access to me not because they cared about Dorothy Jean Chambers, who liked detective novels and gospel music, but because they cared about Dorothy Chambers, who could introduce them to someone who could introduce them to someone who could change their life. I was a network, a connection, a means to an end. By the time I hit 64, I was tired. Bond tired, soul tired, the kind of tired that sleep doesn't fix. My doctor gently suggested that maybe it was time to consider retirement. "You've worked for 42 years, she said. "You've earned a rest." I laughed. "I don't know how to rest," I told her. She looked at me with the kind of pity doctors reserve for patients who don't realize they're the problem, and said, "That's why you need to learn." So I announced my retirement. 6 months' notice, which was more than required but felt appropriate for someone who'd been there longer than most of the current executives had been alive. The company threw me a party, a big one, at a fancy venue with catering and an open bar and a slideshow of my career set to music that was supposed to be inspiring, but mostly just made me feel old. I should have been excited. I should have been grateful. Instead, I felt suspicious. Because in the weeks leading up to the party, I'd noticed something. The people who'd been calling me, emailing me, asking for advice and favors and just 5 minutes of your time. "Dorothy, please," they were calling more. So much more. Like they knew the well was about to run dry and they wanted one last drink. Marcus, a junior VP who I'd mentored for 3 years, called to ask if I could introduce him to a client before I left. "It would really help me establish credibility," he said. Translation: "Use your credibility to boost mine, and I'll take it from there without you." Sheila, a colleague who I'd helped get promoted twice, sent an email asking if I'd be willing to make some calls on her behalf for a project she was pitching. "You have such great relationships," she wrote, "and I know you won't need them after retirement." Translation: "You're done with these people. Can I have them?" Even my neighbor, a woman named Patricia, who I'd exchanged pleasantries with for 8 years, suddenly invited me to coffee to ask if I knew anyone in venture capital, because her son had a revolutionary app idea. I didn't. She looked disappointed, like I'd failed a test I didn't know I was taking. It occurred to me, in a moment of clarity that felt both bitter and clarifying, that I didn't actually know who in my life cared about me versus who cared about what I could do for them. And I realized I had one chance to find out before the title disappeared and I became just another retiree. That's when I decided to run my experiment. I called my financial advisor, a woman named Grace, who I'd worked with for 20 years and who I trusted in the way. You trust someone who's seen your bank statements and never judged you for impulse buying a stand mixer you used once? "Grace," I said, "I need you to do something unusual." I explained the plan. She was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "Dorothy, this is either brilliant or cruel." "Maybe both," I said. "Will you help me?" She sighed. "Yes, but only because I'm curious too." Here's what we did. We manufactured financial disaster. Not real disaster, everything was actually fine. Carefully protected in trusts and accounts that were hidden behind layers of paperwork. But on paper, where anyone who is curious might look. It appeared that Dorothy Chambers had made catastrophically bad investments and lost everything. Medical bills fake from a condition I didn't have. A reverse mortgage on my apartment fake that suggested I was over-leveraged. Legal fees fake from a lawsuit that didn't exist. We even planted a few careful rumors with people who I knew couldn't keep their mouths shut. Did you hear about Dorothy? Poor thing made some terrible investments. She's basically broke. The rumors spread like fire in a drought. Within 2 weeks, people who'd been calling me daily suddenly went quiet. The requests for favors stopped. Sheila stopped responding to my emails about the project she'd wanted my help with. Marcus canceled our farewell lunch, but the retirement party was already scheduled. It's already paid for by the company, and I wasn't about to let it go to waste. So I went ahead with it, playing the part of a woman whose financial life had collapsed, but who was too proud to cancel her. Own, send, dash, off. The party was on a Friday night in early October. The venue was a beautiful loft space with exposed brick and enormous windows that overlooked the river. The company had spared no expense: 3 bars, a catered dinner, a jazz trio, and a speech planned by the CEO. I arrived early and watched people file in. 73 guests by my final count. I knew maybe 40. Well, the rest were acquaintances, clients. People who showed up because it looked good. I dressed carefully for the occasion. A simple black dress. Good jewelry, but not ostentatious. Sensible shoes. I wanted to look dignified, but not wealthy. I wanted to look like someone who might, in fact, have lost everything but still had her self-respect. The first hour was what you'd expect. People congratulated me, told stories about working with me, made toasts that ranged from sincere to obligatory. The CEO gave a speech about my unparalleled contributions, and presented me with a plaque and a bonus check that I accepted with a smile that felt like a mask. Then, during dinner, I made my move. I stood up and tapped my glass. The room quieted. "Thank you all for coming," I said. "This means the world to me. I've spent 42 years in this industry, and I'm grateful for every connection, every opportunity, every lesson learned." People smiled, nodded, raised their glasses. I'm also going to be honest with you about something I haven't been advertising. The smiles started to falter. As some of you may have heard, I've had some financial difficulties lately. Medical expenses, some bad investments, legal issues. It's been humbling, to say the least. I'm not broke, but I'm not where I thought I'd be at retirement. The room went completely silent. You could hear the jazz trio in the corner still playing, oblivious to the fact that I'd just detonated a social grenade. "So I want to thank the company for this incredible party," I continued, "but I also want to be realistic. I'm going to need to make some changes moving forward. I'm selling my apartment, downsizing, cutting costs, and I'm going to need to be honest about the fact that some of the professional favors people have asked for, the introductions, the recommendations, the advice, those are going to be harder for me to provide now. Not because I don't want to help, but because my circumstances have changed, and I have to prioritize differently." I sat down. The silence lasted about 5 seconds before the chatter started, nervous and low. I watched faces. Some showed concern, some showed pity, some showed what looked like panic. Marcus, the junior VP, excused himself to take a phone call and didn't come back. Sheila suddenly remembered she had an early morning and left during dessert. By 9 o'clock, the party was winding down. People were leaving in clumps, making excuses about babysitters and early flights and work emails they had to answer. By 9:30, the room had emptied to about 20 people. By 10, the caterers were packing up. And the venue coordinator was giving me pointed looks about the end time on our contract. "We should probably start cleaning up." I said to no one in particular. 17 people found immediate reasons to leave. I'd love to help, but my car is double parked. I have to catch the last train. My back. Lifting things. They scattered like birds. Polite but efficient. Leaving behind half-empty glasses and crumpled napkins and me, 3 people stayed. The first was Grace, my financial advisor, who I'd invited to the party because she was in on the ruse and because she'd been part of my life for 20 years, in a way that transcended finance. She grabbed a trash bag and started collecting plates without a word. The second was James, a junior analyst who'd started at the firm 6 months ago and who I'd never actually worked with directly. He was young, 24 maybe, with a kind of earnest face that made you either want to protect him or warn him that earnestness gets crushed in this industry. He rolled up his sleeves and started stacking chairs. The third was Claudette, the building's evening custodian, a woman I'd chatted with hundreds of times over the years when I worked late and she was making her rounds. She wasn't invited to the party she'd been working, emptying trash cans in other parts of the building, but she saw us cleaning up and came over. "You need help," she said. It wasn't a question. The four of us cleaned that loft space in 45 minutes. We collected glasses, broke down tables, swept floors, hauled trash bags to the service elevator. We worked in a rhythm that felt almost meditative, the kind of quiet companionship that doesn't require conversation. When we finished, the venue coordinator actually thanked me for leaving the space in better condition than most clients did. We stood outside on the sidewalk afterward. The four of us, October air cool and the city noisy in that comforting Friday night way. I looked at them, Grace in her cocktail dress holding trash bags, James with his tie loosened and sleeves filthy, Claudette in her uniform with her cart parked nearby, and felt something unlock in my chest. "Thank you," I said. "You didn't have to stay." "Yes, I did," Grace said. "You're my friend, Dorothy, not my client." "My friend. And friends help clean up." James shrugged. "You gave a speech tonight about circumstances changing. I figured you might actually need help. Plus, my mom raised me right." Claudette smiled. "Miss Dorothy, you've been kind to me for 10 years. You ask about my grandkids. You remember their names? When my husband was sick, you sent flowers. You think I'm going to walk past you cleaning up your own party?" "No, ma'am." I started crying. Not delicate tears, but the full, shaking, undignified kind that come from holding too much in for too long. Grace put her arm around me. James looked panicked in the way young men do when women cry. Claudette handed me one of those industrial paper towels from her cart that are rough but work better than tissues. I lied. I said when I could speak again, "I'm not broke. I'm fine." I set the whole thing up to see who actually cared. Grace laughed. "I know. I helped you fake it, remember?" "I didn't know," James said. "But I guess it doesn't matter. You still needed help cleaning up." "Miss Dorothy," Claudette said gently, "I don't care if you've got $10 or $10 million. You're a good woman. That's what matters." We went to a diner because after an emotional reckoning, few need eggs and coffee even if it's 10:30 at night, and we talked for 2 hours. I learned that James had come to finance because his single mother worked 3 jobs to put him through college, and he wanted to make enough money that she never had to work again. I learned that Claudette had 4 grandchildren and was saving up to visit Nigeria, where her family was originally from, before she got too old to travel. I learned that Grace had been secretly writing a novel for 5 years about a woman who embezzles from her company to fund a dog rescue. And it was either brilliant or insane, and she couldn't tell which. "Why did you stay?" I asked James. "You barely know me." He stirred his coffee, thinking. "My mom cleaned houses my whole childhood," he said. "Rich people's houses. And she used to come home and tell me about the clients who treated her like furniture and the ones who asked about her day. She said the ones who saw her were the ones worth working for. You see people, Ms. Chambers. That's why I stayed." "Why did you run the test?" Grace asked me. "What were you hoping to find?" "Proof," I said, "that someone cared about Dorothy, not about what Dorothy could do for them." "And what did you find?" Claudette asked. 3 someones, I said, which is 3 more than I thought I'd get. I went home that night and slept better than I had in months. The next morning, I called Marcus and Sheila and a half-dozen other people who'd disappeared when they thought the well had run dry. I didn't call to confront them. I called to thank them. "Thank you for showing me exactly who you are," I said pleasantly. "It's clarifying. I won't be available for those introductions you asked about, or the recommendations, or the advice. But I wish you well." I could hear the shock in their voices, the scrambling. Dorothy, I think there was a misunderstanding. No misunderstanding, I said. Just clarity. Have a good rest of your life. I hung up. It felt spectacular. Then I started building something new. Or maybe I was just finally noticing what had been there all along. Grace became not just my financial advisor, but one of my closest friends. We met for lunch every Tuesday, and she let me read chapters of her ridiculous, wonderful novel. James and I stayed in touch. I mentored him, not because he asked for favors, but because he reminded me why I'd loved this work once the problem solving. The patterns. The way numbers could tell stories if you knew how to listen. Claudette and I became friends in the way that feels both unlikely and inevitable. She invited me to her granddaughter's quinceañera, and I went, and I danced badly, and no one cared. I helped her grandson with his college essay about what it means to come from a family of immigrants and workers. And he got into his first choice school. When Claudette finally made it to Nigeria the following summer, she sent me photos every day, her in front of her grandmother's village, her holding babies who shared her face, her crying at a church service where they sang songs her mother used to sing. I retired. Truly retired, which meant I stopped working 60 hours a week and started working 0. I volunteered at a financial literacy nonprofit, teaching people in my old neighborhood how to budget, save, invest. I read novels that had been on my list for decades. I traveled not to impress anyone, but to see things Leonard and I had talked about seeing together. I went to Peru and cried at Machu Picchu because he would have loved it. I went to Japan during cherry blossom season and ate at a tiny restaurant where the chef had 3 Michelin stars and served exactly 7 people a night. I also threw another party. 1 year after the retirement fiasco. I called it Dorothy's Real Retirement Party, and I invited exactly 3 people: Grace, James, and Claudette. We rented a karaoke room and sang terribly. We ate too much Korean barbecue and laughed until we couldn't breathe. At the end of the night, Grace gave a toast to Dorothy, who taught us that wealth isn't measured in dollars. It's measured in people who stay when the lights go out, James added. And who help clean up, Claudette finished, even when there's no one watching. 2 years after my retirement, Marcus reached out. Not via email, but via a long handwritten letter. He apologized for disappearing when he thought I'd lost everything. He admitted he'd been using me for connections, that he'd been transactional, that he'd learned slowly, painfully, that success built on using people was empty. He didn't ask for anything. He just said he was sorry. I wrote back, not to absolve him, but to acknowledge the apology. I'm glad you figured it out, I wrote. It took me 65 years and a fake bankruptcy. You're ahead of schedule. We met for coffee 6 months later. He'd left the firm, started working for a nonprofit that provided microloans to small businesses in underserved communities. Turns out I'm good at finance, he said, but I was doing it for the wrong reasons. I told him I was proud of him. I meant it. Sheila never reached out. I saw her occasionally at industry events I still attended out of habit more than obligation. She'd nod politely, I'd nod back. And we'd both pretend we'd never cleaned up a party that revealed exactly who we were to each other. It was fine. Not every story gets a redemption arc. Some people are just characters who exit stage left, and you let them. On my 67th birthday, Grace, James, Claudette, and I went to dinner. James brought his mother, who cried when she met me because James had told her the story of the retirement party and she wanted to thank me for seeing her boy. Grace brought a printed manuscript of her novel, dedicated to Dorothy, who stayed when I needed an audience of 1. Claudette brought her husband, who was recovering from the illness that had almost taken him 2 years before, and he shook my hand and said, "Thank you for being good to my wife when other people made her invisible." We ate and laughed and told stories. And at the end of the night, they presented me with a gift, a framed photo of the 4 of us cleaning up that loft space 2 years ago. I didn't even know someone had taken it. Turns out the venue coordinator had snapped it on her phone because she thought it was remarkable that anyone was cleaning up their own party. The photo showed us mid-work, Grace holding a trash bag and laughing, James stacking chairs, Claudette sweeping. and me in my black dress directing traffic like a general underneath the photo. They'd written, "The people who stay." I hung it in my living room where I see it every morning, and every morning reminds me of the most valuable thing I learned in 67 years, that you can spend a lifetime building wealth, power, and connections. But if you want to know what you actually have, watch who stays when you pretend you have nothing. I pretended to be broke at my retirement party, and 70 people left. 3 stayed. And those 3 taught me that I'd been measuring the wrong things for most of my life. That a junior analyst with a good heart is worth more than 100 contacts who only call when they need something. That a custodian who remembers your name is worth more than a CEO who forgets it the moment you're no longer useful. That a friend who helps you clean up literally and metaphorically is the only kind of friend that matters. People ask me sometimes if I regret the test, if it was manipulative, cruel, unnecessary. Maybe it was all those things. But it was also the most clarifying thing I've ever done. Because now, in my late 60s, I know exactly who I can call at 2 in the morning if the world falls apart. I know exactly who will show up, not because they have to, but because they want to. And I know that the greatest wealth I ever accumulated wasn't in my investment portfolio. It was in the 3 people who stayed to help fold chairs and bag trash when everyone else found the door. So here's what I tell young people now. When they ask for advice about building a career, build your skills, build your reputation, build your wealth, but also build a list of people who would stay if it all disappeared tomorrow. Because that list, however, short is the only list that matters when you're 65 and looking back on your life. Wondering what was real and what was performance, my list has 3 names. And I've never felt richer,